I've never been an atheist. Even from an early age, I had a strong sense that something much bigger was going on behind the scenes, and I had a fascination for all things supernatural. My mum believed in Jesus, but we weren't a religious family. We never went to church. I think at that age I believed in him too, because I remember praying to him. But by the time I got to my late teens, my impression of religious institutions was that they were stuffy and formal and controlling, and I thought, that's not for me. So off I went, my own way, and in my ignorance I dabbled in things like tarot cards and paid occasional visits to psychics, that sort of thing. This more or less ground to halt for my 20s, to make way for parties and drinking and general bad behaviour. I was definitely pretty careless with my life sometimes during that decade, and thankfully I emerged out of it in one piece, but there's lots of behaviour in it that I regret, and that it would continue to haunt me for quite a long time. In 2005, when I was 31, my mum died of cancer. That knocked the stuffing out of me and left me disturbed by the concept of death. So I kind of resurrected my old spiritual seeking ways and pulled out my tarot cards, and over time got involved with things like New Age and Law of Attraction and whatever other fad that was coming along. It all seemed to add a sense of adventure, but peace and fulfillment were never a factor in my life back then. I'm not sure where my night terrors began, but they were at problem levels by my mid-30s. I was waking up screaming most nights. I had sleep paralysis. I dreamt about the darkness and malevolent spirits trying to tug at me. At the time I put it down to maybe not dealing with my mum's death or something, so I took up meditation, tried lots of different types, and I suppose I thought it was helping me calm my mind down and release some of my sadness, but an empty, hollow feeling began to grow in me, and I don't know where it came from. I didn't know anyway. I met Jim when I was 35, and amazingly he married me 2 years later, despite waking him up most nights with my nightmares. We were living in Tunbridge Wells when my sense of not belonging became a thing, and convinced change of location would sort that one out. We moved to Edinburgh, somewhere I was very familiar with, but when we got there, I felt worse. I felt lost, and I thought, we've made a mistake. Started combing the internet for houses down south, and over the next 4 or 5 years, I think we searched the length and breadth of the UK for somewhere new to live, and everywhere felt wrong. And it was weird because I've moved around a lot in my life. You could stick me anywhere and I'd be fine. So I didn't know what was happening to me. It just felt like there was no home for me in this world, and I didn't know why. Compounding my sense of not belonging, I was becoming increasingly aware that the world seemed to be losing the plot. Loads of crazy ideologies were springing up, and people were just adopting them as norms. And I felt like, I'm not on board with this. There's something wrong with this. And I started also noticing that news stories seemed to have inconsistencies, and I started smelling a rat. Found myself delving down internet rabbit holes and into the world of conspiracy theories to try and get to the truth. And what I found down there was A, a lot of the conspiracy theories are true, and B, it's much darker down there you can ever imagine. There is a dark, evil underbelly in this world, in control of everything. And I think it's becoming more obvious now, but back then trying to tell people was completely futile. It just lost credibility. But it did lead to a decision to get rid of our TV. Didn't want to contaminate our minds any further, and that ended up being a really good decision. I had no idea how brainwashed I was. It was like over the next few years, a lot of my long-held views on things just began to fall away. And it did make it hard being around people though, because Everyone else seemed to be invested in the world and its narratives, but I didn't believe a word of it. And my opinions became unacceptable in the sort of popular progressive mindset. So I started just guzzling alcohol as much as I could to get through gatherings. It was quite a lonely time. In November 2014, my little brother was diagnosed with terminal cancer. He was put in hospice right away, and that really upset him. So we managed to get him transferred out of there to our home in Edinburgh, and he died 3 weeks later. And his final night on earth was so traumatic. It left Jim and I in tatters because we had no idea how to process it. This was the beginning of my spiritual belief systems beginning to crumble, because it offered nothing. All this new age stuff. There was no comfort. There was nothing to catch us. It was empty. But I had nothing to replace it with, so I clung on. So during the next few years, our own personal descent sped up. We didn't want to be home anymore, but we continued to fail to find somewhere else to live. So the pub became our second home. And those were our darkest days. We got stuck in a loop we didn't know how to get out of. I started to find myself standing outside churches and thinking, I wonder if any truth or solace could be found there. So, but I can trace my turning point to around then, and it began with a simple thought. If the world is more evil and dark than I ever could have imagined, then what if the opposite is also true? What if there's a light and a love that I've never known? Maybe I should try and find that. Where to start? But amazingly, signposts started to spring up, and they all pointed towards Jesus Christ. So I'd heard that an old school friend had had a spiritual awakening, and he was a Christian. And I thought, what's spiritual awakening's got to do with Christianity? And I can't believe I even thought that now. But I was curious, so I went to his church, and I heard his story, and it was an amazing story, but I just had this sticking point, which was, church, religion. I don't know about that though. But he did plant a seed in me that day. And then after that, I discovered Jordan Peterson online, somebody who seemed to be talking sense in our increasingly mad world. And so he had a bunch of old lectures on Old Testament stories that I stumbled across. And I found myself watching them, and I guess I could say I was gripped by that. It was that seed being watered right there, I suppose. I was still a walking car crash and feeling pretty miserable, so one night I said a prayer. Okay, Jesus, if you're the way, can I have a sign? And the next morning I got up and I went out for a run round the park, and I was getting my breath back on a park bench, and a girl came up to me and she handed me a leaflet, and it said on it, "Come to our church to dispel the myths around Christianity." And I thought, I can't remember ever receiving a Christian leaflet, certainly not in my adulthood. So I thought, this is my prayer being answered. And shortly after that, a new friend who just happened to be Christian invited us to his church. And so we went, and it was on November the 11th, 2018. And Armistice Day, basically 4 years ago today. And we were met by a cheerful, welcoming minister. And I left the church that day with something I had been devoid of for a long time. And that was hope. It was a tiny glimmer, but I clung to it. And I said to Jim, maybe if we do this for a while and see what happens. Finally, I picked up a Bible that had been in our bookcase all along, which is typical, and started reading the New Testament. I got as far as Sermon on the Mount in Matthew when something so weird began to happen. I could feel like I was splitting into two people. One of them was resistant, didn't want to believe it, didn't want to believe what I was reading. And the other half of me was tired and ready just to give up. I slammed it shut because I thought, what's going on here? But I couldn't get it out of my head, so I revisited those verses, and same thing happened, just picked up where it left off. By this time, my inner rebel lost the tug-of-war match, and I surrendered. And in that moment, it was like receiving a download of information. I suddenly knew that the Bible was true, that Jesus was real, the whole story, dying on the cross. I just knew it was true, and I'd been running away from it my whole life. I also knew that my whole moral framework that had built up over years, which was acceptable in this world, but it only existed to justify my chaotic lifestyle choices, and when held up to God's perfect morality, it was basically in the gutter. And I also could see that all my spiritual seeking ways were separating me from God, not drawing me closer. And that's why I was feeling so empty and so lost all the time. It was nothing to do with new houses. And so with that, I just closed my eyes, and a wave of remorse just crashed down over my head, and I burst out crying. And I knew what I needed to do next, and I waited for Jim to go out to the shops. And I got on my knees and I prayed for forgiveness, and everything I could remember that I've done wrong, out it came like a fountain. It was a relief, actually, to let it all out. But I got to my knees when it was over, and I dried my eyes, and I thought, oh, that was weird. I wonder if he heard me. The following day, I was just pottering around my flat and reading more Bible and researching things Christian related online. And I thought, well, what now? And I thought, well, you can pray for the Holy Spirit. And I thought, well, I'll just do that. So that evening, I prayed to receive the Holy Spirit, and then I climbed into bed, and right there, this energy, warm energy, poured into me. It was like electricity, and it was really powerful, but it was also soothing and beautiful. And I thought, I'm in the presence of God. I couldn't believe it. I just froze, didn't move a muscle, and just cried my eyes out. And I thought to myself, finally, I'm home. So, the following morning, I flew out of bed because I had this sense of urgency that I needed to get all my tarot and all that out of the house. I needed to clean my house. So I chucked it all in the dumpster outside, and I felt pretty good about that. And consequently, I had a bit of a spiritual battle afterwards. Turns out there were dark forces that weren't too happy about me turning to Christ. And but I was able to get on top of that with the help of some online preachers. And once it was over, everything changed. The atmosphere around me changed, like the sort of oppressive, bland atmosphere lifted, and the colours seemed more vibrant, and my spirit felt light, and I felt overwhelmed with this feeling that everything was going to be alright. In John 8:36, it says, "So if the Son sets you free, be free indeed." I never thought in a million years I'd come to know what that freedom would feel like, and I do. I'm free from my past, I'm free from everything I ever did wrong, and there was lots and lots. And it's like a clean slate, been washed away by the blood of the Lamb. I'm also free from my destructive behaviours, so I was definitely drinking myself into an early grave. And I wasn't planning to stop drinking. It just kind of slowed down to a nothing on its own. If you knew what I was like before, you know that was a miracle right there. And I'm also free from my night terrors, which is really brilliant. And I'm free from fear of death. I was living in quite acute fear of death because of what happened to my family. And I was constantly flying into a panic over thinking I could find lumps and bumps and things. And now I just do not have that fear at all. That's another miracle. I feel free, and I felt like that every day since. So it's been 4 years since then, and the Bible has helped me to understand why the world is losing the plot at the moment, and that it is a spiritual reason. But as a Christian, there's nothing to fear. If I do let things get on top of me, all I have to do is put my hands together to pray, or listen to Christian music, or read the Bible, and I come back into the presence of God. And that's a real thing, by the way. It's not imaginary. When you believe in Jesus, put your trust in Him, He sends His Holy Spirit to live inside of us. And when you focus on Him, it's like His Spirit lights up inside of us. And it's an amazing feeling. So has my opinion about organised religion changed since I've become a Christian? I would say not really. In fact, it's possibly even worse. I'd say hierarchical religious institutions are tied to the state in any way, that have a lot of power. Where there's power, there's corruption. I'd stay away from those places. Their religious practices are man-made. They don't even bear any resemblance to what we're told to do when we come together to worship as Christians. So personally, I've tried to find an independent church. But it's different for everybody. And I also think Jesus isn't a religion. He is God who came in the flesh to rescue us, and we do need rescuing. And we can know Him personally. He's real, and He did die as a blood atonement for all of our sins. And we all need to be forgiven while we're still alive on this earth. This life here and now is our opportunity to be reconciled back to our Father in heaven and spend an eternity with Him, an amazing, breathtaking, incredible eternity that's beyond our imaginations. It's not something to be passed up. The day I decided to pick up a Bible and read it for myself instead of listening to noisy popular opinion was easily the best decision of my life, and by miles and miles. And I pray and hope that you'll make that decision too. Thank you for listening to my testimony. God bless.